Hi, I'm Sleep Aid, your local sleep paralysis demon, and today we're taking a look at Zodiac World, a webtoon by Kimchi222. And if you would like to submit your webcomic for review, you can do so on the Reddit post in the description. So, let's have a look at Zodiac World. It's a romance fantasy. We'll read the description and then I'll talk about it a bit. It says, 12 signs, 4 elements, and 1 forbidden law never cross the bloodlines. To keep their volatile powers in check, the Zodiac spirits divided into the earth, air, fire, and water clans. For eons, marriage between them was a death sentence, until an air nomad and a fire warrior risked everything for a secret love. Now, their execution has ignited a cycle of vengeance that threatens to tear the world apart. Now, that all sounds very interesting. And I think that happens in the comic. So, let's dive into this one. There are a lot of concerns here. So, right off the bat, you'll notice that the art in the first episode is very, very different from what you might be expecting from the later episodes. It's very, very different from the thumbnail. And as far as I can tell, the first season, as it's labeled, was probably drawn by a different person, because the second season lists a separate artist from the author. And there is an art style shift at the season 2 mark. Also, it is worth pointing out that the first episode was in November of 2020. The most recent episode was not long ago. And so this is a series that has been ongoing for almost 6 years. And sometimes over that amount of time, the art can grow and change dramatically. But anyways, the early art doesn't look like what you might be expecting. And the early story doesn't really read the way I was expecting, and this comic is kind of a mess. There are a few decent looking panels art-wise. There are a few moments where the art is nice and it's pretty to look at, particularly in the later season, not as often early on. But other than that, there's really nothing to latch on to. It's very confusing. It's very unfocused, and it's messy. And the dialogue is really strange in the way that it's written. I'll continue scrolling through it, and we'll kind of see as we go. But essentially, what happens in this comic is very easy to explain. It's very easy to summarize because it's almost nothing. So, the first episode, we're introduced to a couple. In the second episode, the woman of the couple who is pregnant she has been captured by some powerful fire figure. He threatens her with death, and that's the end of the first season. And it says in the description, it refers to the execution as having happened, so we can assume that it did, but it's never really clarified on screen. The second season, we have a prince figure who is being pushed into a political marriage by his father, the king, and so he decides to disguise himself as a maid and have his bodyguard pretend to be him to go on a date, a courting date, with a potential suitor, or suitie, whatever, but a potential princess. And the date has just begun as of the latest episode, and so that's all that happens in the entire comic. So over about 20 episodes in 6 years, the story really isn't making any progress at all, and it's not very well delivered, what it is. And I mean, here we have, for example, a character speaking the Japanese word. I think that's Japanese, which is then translated in parentheses. And so these were the type of moments where, as I was reading this, I couldn't tell if the whole comic was a joke being played on me, which is not a good sign. And I think after having read the rest of it, I've come to the conclusion that I think it's meant to be taken seriously. It's just not very well made. We've got pretty big problems with the dialogue. The way it's written is really questionable. Some of the words that the characters use is really questionable. We've got just strange choice of wording. And yeah. So I guess what's happening here is he's revealing that she's pretending to be a different Zodiac for her forbidden love, which apparently is forbidden, as we found out again in the description of the comic. It's not explained in the comic. And this is what I was looking for. Yeah, here we go. There's a dialogue balloon where there are multiple different sizes of text, and it's like stretched lengthwise a few places, and so like all the text is like it's being written on different lines and stretched to different sizes, and there are a lot of weird things like that that just make it very confusing to read. But it is what it is. And then every now and then there are panels like this where it kind of looks like it's a base pose, like a stock pose that's being traced over. And even after the switch in artist, which seems to be deliberate, there are a lot of moments where the art style seems to change panel to panel, which makes it look as though some of them are being traced. And I don't know if that's happening, but that's what it looks like. And I'm just not really sure what the point of this comic is. I mean, it spends so long, so much of its runtime setting up the scene with the woman previously, being accused of committing a crime and then subsequently being apparently executed. And that's not mentioned again. And again, like it says in the description that is the inciting incident which sets events in motion, but it's not mentioned, and so we don't actually know how that relates to anything that's happening in this second half, and it all becomes very confusing, especially because, again, we spent so long with that first set of characters, and so generally you would assume that those are main characters, they're going to be very important, but when they're just never mentioned again, it feels like suddenly we're shifting into a different comic. And it's just, I don't really know what to say about this. I mean, it feels like it's directionless. And so not only is it taking 6 years up until this point to get to where we're at, which is not very far, but it also doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere either. We don't really know anything about these characters, and so it's not clear why we're supposed to care about this arranged marriage and the switch between characters for this ploy. And there's just nothing to get invested in. And then when we get to the season 2 mark and the art changes and it gets quite a bit better, we end up in this strange situation where half of the panels turn into these chibis or super deforms or joke panels. We end up with half of them being memes, and so we're constantly flipping back and forth between this really serious, really good looking art and these little jokes, and it really throws the tone into question when, again, the first section of the comic was about a pregnant woman being captured and executed. And now we're just in a jokey scenario where Everything is memes and nothing is serious. And so there's a lot of tonal whiplash. There's a lack of momentum in the plot. There's a lack of momentum, period, because the few episodes that we do have are also very short. And so for a comic that's, again, 6 years in the making, sometimes months in between episodes, for them to only be a few panels each with almost nothing happening, like, this is an episode. Season 2, Episode 5. We have girl sitting at table. She turns to face man entering scene. And there's a glamour shot of her curious face. That's the whole episode. No dialogue, nothing. It's about 2 panels wide. And so that's another thing. The episodes are all different lengths. And so you don't even really know what to expect. And they're not uploaded at consistent dates. So you don't know when to expect it. And I hate to say it, but I just can't think of any reason that someone would read this comic. I can't think of any reason to recommend this comic. It does almost everything wrong, and other than some decent art every now and then, there's almost no appeal to it. It has a lot of foundational problems that really need work, and at this point we've changed fonts. Now our text is too small. Look how much smaller the text is than the balloon. It's baffling. This is the most bizarre comic I've probably read on Webtoon Canvas, and I don't say this lightly because typically I try to be pretty optimistic about these reviews. I like to encourage artists to keep going with their passion projects and kind of find ways to improve them if there are things that are struggling, or find ways to make things work if they aren't working. But this is a comic where it would probably be better just to restart, because there's no foundation here. There's a complete lack of a foundation, and when you're 20 episodes in and 6 years down the road, that is going to scare off a lot of potential readers. Even if the next episodes solve all of these problems and turn out to be good, a lot of people are not going to sift through these first 20 episodes of confusion, of tonal whiplash, of strange pacing, strange dialogue, constantly changing fonts and text sizes, and a lot of people will see those early episodes and just assume the whole comic is going to be like that, and they won't bother reading it. And so this is a case where it would probably be better to just restart. And then also interesting is that episode 20 is the same as episode 19. It's just reposted. And it even comes up in the comment section. Is this a copy of the last ep? It's for exposure for new subs, because only updated comic are seen on the top of the Canvas category, but yeah, I should not be doing that. Yes, that is correct. You should not be doing that. Because if you're hoping to gain exposure by putting your comic at the top of the category, by reposting the same episode over and over again, all you're doing is scaring away the readers that you already have invested. If they see that you're just making an update that is nothing for the sake of pushing the comic to the top of the category, you're building mistrust with your readership. And so anybody that is following this, I mean, we've got people commenting on it, so obviously someone's reading it. Anybody that's actually following it, they're not going to know if a new episode is actually an episode or a repost of a previous one for exposure. And so you're creating mistrust, which makes people not want to click on it. It further hammers in that lack of consistency. If you don't have a consistent upload schedule, and if people don't know what to expect out of your uploads, then this is the type of thing that's just giving them one more reason not to read this. And honestly, promotion on Webtoon is difficult. It's not a platform that has a lot of built-in discoverability, but typically my advice for almost any comic or any creative medium is to focus first on making the thing good. Because all the promotion in the world won't matter if people click on the comic and find out that it's unreadable. And so the best thing that you could do to promote your comic is make something really good that people want to talk about. that people want to read and keep reading, and every algorithm on the internet is fed by that same driving force of watch time, of read time, of clicks and whatnot. And so if something's really good and people click on it and they stay on it and read more of it and want more of it, then that's going to be the best entry-level promotion you can do. And that's what you want to secure first before you worry about externally promoting, before you worry about mastering the algorithm or staying at the top of the category or whatnot. You want to make sure that the thing that you're promoting is worth promoting. And this comic needs a lot of help. So without fully deleting it and restarting it, I think that what at least needs to be considered is consolidating some of the early episodes so that it's a little bit less misleading. Because when I clicked on this and saw there were 20 episodes, I thought that it was going to be a decent length read. It might take me 20 minutes or an hour, depending on how long the episodes are, but I thought that there was going to be something to really bite into. And when you read the description, it sounds like there is, but when you actually read the episodes and they're 5 panels long and nothing's happening and it's all confusing, then it doesn't really give you the substance that you would expect out of a 20-episode series, especially one that's been going on for 6 years. And so consolidating some of these into fewer episodes so that it was more straightforward is probably a good idea, because you have to consider that every time someone reads an episode of this comic, in order to get to the next episode, they have to click the next button. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but what that means is that every time someone reads an episode of this comic, when they're done with that episode, they have to make the decision, do I go to the next one, or do I click somewhere else instead? And so if your episodes are really short and lacking in substance, it's not beneficial to have a lot of them, because essentially people are going to be making that decision constantly. Way more often, they're going to be making the decision if they want to continue reading or not. And again, with the way that some of these episodes are just very confusing and very short, more often you're going to have people clicking off. They might read the first 3 or 4 and then start to see all the glaring structural problems, and then again, every time they click an episode, they're reminded, I could click on something else. I could go read a different comic. And so it would probably be a good idea to consolidate some of these, get them out of the way faster. That way people don't have as much time to click off. And that way, if you improve on some of the problems that this has, people will actually stick around to read it, the later episodes, which presumably could get better. So what would I recommend for this? Well, I think that, probably consolidating a lot of the episodes would be a good idea. But if you wanted to fix this narrative, there needs to be a little bit more focus, and there needs to be a little bit more momentum. It's almost hard to suggest changes to the writing, because even though the writing has problems, so little has happened that there's almost not enough to even really work with here. So, like I said, the first season, as it's labeled, is just a pregnant woman getting executed. The second season is a man pretending to be a prince so the prince doesn't have to go on a date. And that's it. And we don't even know how these events are connected yet, because they're both so short. And so it could be a thing where, maybe these events will tie together in the coming episodes, and we just haven't got there yet because the pace is so slow. But yeah, like I said, it's hard to even make suggestions on what to do with the writing, because there's almost nothing to work with. As far as the art goes, I think that the Season 2 art is much better, but the lack of consistency in the art is very confusing for the reader. So if I look at these newer episodes, the style is totally different in this episode versus the beginning of Season 2, where we have this style, this more painted style. And so it seems like it's a completely different person drawing it, or maybe multiple different people over the span of this thing. And so there's no artistic consistency, there's no tonal consistency, there's not consistency even in the font. Everything about this comic is inconsistent. It's highly unfocused. I can't honestly see the point of it. It was frustrating to read. It's frustrating even to review because it's so unfocused and inconsistent. It's difficult to even know how to describe this, what to even say about this. So this is a comic that has a lot of problems. It needs a full rework. It needs a top to bottom restructuring. And I think that what's important is really to determine what the goal of the comic is. What is the purpose of this Zodiac World comic existing? If it's just for fun, then none of these things matter. If you're only making it for your own purposes, for your own enjoyment, then none of this criticism actually matters. But it was requested to be reviewed, and so therefore I'm reviewing it, right? I'm giving you my honest thoughts. But however, if you want this to grow into a series that has a following, that has a fan base, then you've got to look at it from a fan's perspective. What do they actually have to latch on to? There's a default attractive character in the second arc, but that's not enough. That there isn't anything really beyond that. And so we don't know anything about how the zodiac signs work, how the elements play into this. We don't really know anything about the world. We know almost nothing about the characters. And even the story, it isn't clear what type of story it's going to be. And so I assume that the pretend prince is probably going to be one of the leads, but if it's a romance fantasy, who's the second lead? Who's the love interest here? Is it this princess that we've only seen visually and has not had any dialogue yet and has only showed up in the later episodes? Or is it someone else? So we don't know because we just aren't really given anything to work with. And so it's very important in a comic, in Webtoon especially, to make clear what the purpose of the comic is right from the get-go. So if it's going to be an enemies to lovers romance, just as an example, then you want to make sure that the enemies are introduced right away and the hint at romance is introduced right away, because then people know reading it, okay, this is enemies to lovers. If it's going to be a slow burn romance, then you would introduce the love interest. So you always want to introduce the two main leads in a romance story, the lover and the love interest. You always want to introduce them as quickly as possible, generally in the first episode, and you want to show what their dynamic is at the beginning in the first episode or as soon as possible, because the core of a romance story is typically going to be that relationship or the pursuit of that relationship. And so you really want to show people immediately what they are getting involved with so that they know if they want to keep reading. And again, with this one, we do start our first episode with a romance and even a pregnancy. But then those characters are apparently executed off screen, and so it's very confusing. We don't know who we're supposed to be following, what we're supposed to be latching onto, what type of romance we're even going to get. It seems like it's leading in the direction of fake dating later, and just marriage of convenience type of things, but none of that is hinted at in the early season. So it's very important to know what type of comic it is you want to make, and it's very important to make sure that the readers can tell right away what type of comic it is that you're trying to make. And so I think that restructuring things to actually introduce the purpose of this would really go a long way. Changing the text so that it's all the same font and all the same size would really be a big help for the readership. It would be nice to keep the episodes closer in length. You don't want to have something that goes from a 20-panel update to a 5-panel update, especially, again, if there's no schedule, then there's no reason that the episodes should be different lengths. But you're just posting this whenever it's done, and so you should make sure that each episode actually has substance. It's already on such a long timeline that delaying it further to get more substantial episodes would only be a benefit at this stage. And yeah, I think I could go on at length about things this comic could do better, because it's doing almost everything wrong. And so essentially I would have to make an entire seminar on how to make a webtoon, because this is just foundationally very messy. it needs a lot of work. Again, ultimately, it depends on why you're making this. If it's just something that you do for fun, then there's no reason to stop doing it. It's perfectly fine if it's just a fun hobby that you enjoy, but if you're actually trying to deliver a really good, really solid comic and you want to build a readership, this is doing almost everything wrong. It would take me probably hours to explain in detail all the ways that it's wrong, but I think we covered most of the basics. I think we mostly covered it, yeah. So that's Zodiac World. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever read. I don't think I would recommend it to anyone. There's not really much more to say. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you in your nightmares.